When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Within the gaming world, there are your general gamers, but then there are those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming. If you're one of those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming, we certainly got the place to send you. Scorpion Lair Games. That's right, Scorpion Lair Games is the creators of the true crime hit Killers, the card game. Let's not forget they also have Killers Clothing Company, their profiler game, and things like the 5-Minute Murder channel on YouTube. And we certainly can't forget the new book that is certainly a hit, Beyond the Headliners, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends. Make sure you visit Jeff and the Scorpion Lair Games on Facebook and everywhere today. Also want to give a quick thank you to our friends over at Ultra Pro, who is the leading manufacturer and supplier of sports, comics, and memorabilia storage. Whether it be card cases, sleeves, top loaders, or travel gear, you name it. We are also going to be working with Ultra Pro in the next few months to do some special giveaway packages for the holiday season coming up in a few months, so stay tuned. Make sure you check them out at ultrapro.com.
This is Brad Balukjian, author of The Six Pack and the Wax Pack, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. This next guest has a follow-up book to his best-selling first book called The Wax Pack. And this book comes as another eye-opening road trip adventure into the pocket of iconic pop culture, and that being professional wrestling.
What?
Starring folks such as the Iron Sheik, Baba,
Russia, number one! Iran, number one! USA, hardcore!
Hulk Hogan, Tito Santana, and many more larger-than-life characters of the WWF in the 80s. The book is The Six Pack, an open road in search of WrestleMania, and the author is Brad Balukjian. I know I butchered that, but Brad, how are you?
It's all right, man.
Well, I should say Dr. Brad, because he has his degree.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, I can't save anyone's life or write you a prescription, but I can tell you about 80s wrestlers.
We've been hanging and banging, brother.
Yeah, go figure. Well, before we dive into, and I actually went and bought a physical copy.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Of course. So before we get into that, when I say he's actually Dr. Brad, he has a bachelor's degree in island biogeography from Duke and a PhD in endocrinology from
entomology.
Okay, excuse me.
It's okay.
This is why I stuck with history, folks. So, what in the hell is island biogeography?
Island biogeography is studying why the plants and animals that live on islands live there and how they evolve on islands. So, like, if you've ever looked at the Galapagos Islands and why the animals are so weird there, that's an example of island biogeography.
So it's your fault in doing research, because you were just talking baseball a little bit with me and sports. It's your fault in doing research in a Philly fanatic then, right?
Yeah, you can blame me, exactly.
Right. Yeah, because he's supposedly from the Galapagos Islands.
Right,
so.
right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
And I know I'll get a text by one of the fanatics' friends by saying that and poking fun, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I think the fanatic is a species of one, right? There's no other. It's kind of like Yoda before we found out about Baby Yoda. Like, there's no other individual that looks quite like him.
No, not at all, except for maybe Mama Fanatic, which you only see once a year at the Fanatic's birthday party.
I stand corrected.
Yeah, that's another conversation for another time, obviously. So, where did the love of professional wrestling come from?
Well, I grew up in Rhode Island, like so many kids in the 80s. You'd put on, after your Saturday morning cartoons, you'd have WWF superstars come on.
Or Wrestling Challenge on Sundays. And
Wrestling Challenge, Wrestling Spotlight. And then there was, Saturday night's main event. I remember that, of course, that was on late at night. And so I would tape record that on the VCR. And one time I tape recorded Saturday night's main event over my mom's episode of All My Children. And I think I was grounded for 2 months. So, yeah, I just, it was just this wonderful escapism as kids to get into the characters and the storylines. And, that back then in the 80s, it was very kind of cartoonish, and Hulk Hogan was an easy hero to root for. And so, although I should say my favorite wrestler was the Iron Sheik, because he was the person that nobody rooted for. And I was always somebody that gravitated towards the unpopular people and figures.
I was going to say, so obviously the story is out there that he may have tried to humble you, Baba, later on during his book.
The first line of the book is the Iron Sheik just threatened to kill me. So it didn't start well in that scenario. But I got to know him personally many years ago when I was in my 20s and was going to write a book with him. And it went completely sideways, and he was pretty out of control at that point. And so I went on with my life, and I went off and got my PhD in studying island biogeography, as we talked about. And then years later, I came back and decided to going on the road and finding him again.
So, yeah, Sheik's story's been told. And I was thinking about it. We're close in age, and because I just turned 40 about a week and a half ago.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you, sir. And I was thinking about when, obviously, you mentioned the not so popular folks like Sheik and such. When I think of Sheik, obviously you think of the title switch at the Garden in January of '84, and But I also think about his tag team run with Nikolai Volkov,
Sure. Yeah.
at least that's of my generation. And I got to know Nikolai quite well.
Oh.
And I still talk to his former manager, Nikita Breznikov,
Oh yeah.
often. Do you know Nikita at all?
I've never met him, but I know of him.
Yeah, I'll have to connect you because, the stories those guys would tell, they're quite entertaining.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And and it just, I'll go to tell the story quickly of Nikolai when he got the induction, a lot of that class of WrestleMania 1,
Yeah.
Sheik and Volkov and Hogan and what Orndorff, that WrestleMania 1 class got to the WWE Hall of Fame.
Right.
I saw Nikita and Nikolai not too long after, say like a month or so later, at an indie show. It's like, hey guys, how you doing? Good to see handshakes, hugs, the whole bit. So Nikolai, how you feeling? Congratulations on the Hall of Fame, because it was the first time I seen him since or had spoken with him. He goes, with my hands. That's the kind of guy you're dealing with Nikolai, very lighthearted. And so obviously you had that project that got shelved with Sheiky Baby and stuff. But when I was thinking about it and first heard about the book, and we actually spoke briefly at WrestleCon, I believe it was on the Saturday.
Right.
Yeah, I came in to say hello and whatnot because we started talking back in March or whatever that was. But the interesting part with the book that really stood out with me is two things. When it says the 6-pack, you went with the old school WWF kind of logo.
Yeah.
But you also have the 3 of the old LJN figures on the cover.
Right.
So how much input did you have with the design and layout of this? Or how much did you say to the publisher and everybody else involved? You come up with it.
No, I wanted control. So they asked me if I had any ideas for the cover. And I said, yeah, I think, I'd love to have the actual LJN figures on there because I grew up collecting them and playing with them. And if you actually look at the cover, you can see that there's all these scuff marks on there. Those are the actual figures that are all beat up from playing with them so much. And so I mailed them the figures, and then they did their thing, and they came up with a few possibilities. And the initial version wasn't very good because it was clearly designed by someone that didn't know wrestling at all, because they had like the guys in completely unrealistic poses. And, I said, okay, no, I said, wrestling fans, we have to respect wrestling fans' intelligence and intensity about this kind of thing, because that they'll be on us if we don't get this right.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
There's a lot of detail in here that you may not easily realize, but for one, the Iron Sheik has Hulk Hogan in a headlock with the left arm, and you always work the left side.
The left side, yep.
So, that was, and then you have Tito Santana flying through the air as a babyface, making the save on the Sheik. And of course, his finishing move was a flying forearm. So they got all of that right after I kind of guided them past their initial attempt.
Well, that's interesting. And obviously, screw it, I'll go there now. And first and foremost, and I was listening to you with, I believe it was Jim Cornette on his episode. And Tito, you were talking about two things that might be very topical. That there were things throughout your research over a couple-year period that might not be able to be put into the book, but also uncomfortable topics. Sure. And one of those, and I just learned it with that episode, is that, well, it's in the book as well, I should say, but to hear it vocalized was a whole different thing, of Tito finding out he had a daughter, because everybody thought of, and like you referenced during his Hall of Fame speech, the Tito thing. He was focused on, and he was. We're not bad mouthing him, folks. He was focused. He wasn't out, partying and doing drugs. Like he tried to save as much money as he could and take care of his family and all that stuff.
He was generally a
But
very responsible guy.
yeah, yeah, especially compared to a lot of his cohorts of the time. He was one of the responsible ones. So
Right.
we're not bad mouthing him here. So what was that story with Tito and his daughter, and how uncomfortable was that talking to him about it?
Yeah, so that wasn't a story that I broke. I mean, when I was doing my research, I came across this. It had been reported. He had done interviews about it, talking about how a few years ago, this woman came forward and said that she had had genetic testing done and realized that Tito was her father and wanted to have a relationship with him of some kind. And it really shook Tito and his family to the core for all the reasons you're talking about. And his wife was upset and was wondering how this happened and when this happened and all the details. And I think, some of Tito's other family, some of his kids were upset. And ultimately he has, as far as I know, not really pursued any kind of a relationship with his daughter out of respect for his wife's wishes and his family's wishes. But I knew all this in my research, and I knew I was going to be interviewing him. And if I would say that, my approach in this book and in the Wax Pack is really about talking about who these people are as people, the human behind the athlete or the performer. And it's really about, the beyond the ring, beyond the field. And so because I only have generally one chapter to write about each person, I'm always trying to figure out, well, what is the main point or the compelling story that says something about who this person is that can illustrate, who they are? What can I focus on? And I think for me, the more I dug into it, the more I saw with Tito. Again, you had this reputation, the Tito thing, and then you had what actually happened and what happened with his daughter. And to me, that was just relevant to show that even the guy who is the most responsible isn't perfect. Like none of us are perfect, right?
No.
And also that a lot of these wrestlers, they all at some point, and I don't really blame them for this. I think I would probably do the same thing, but you can't help but become your character to some extent. And Tito's character was to be this unrealistically virtuous, perfect babyface, right? And that's fine as a wrestling character, but of course, no human, just like Hulk Hogan, right? Hulk Hogan was this, perfect hero, but in real life, Terry Bollea is a very flawed person.
And we saw some of that in public over a couple of year period between
Right.
his son's car accident and things he may or may not have said, the Bubba the Love Sponge.
Right.
Yeah, there was a couple year period there where you had the reputation of what Hulk Hogan did. Then
Right.
for a time period, obviously things, not to quote the theme song, when it comes crashing down and it hurts inside. But
Sure. Yeah, and I get into that in his chapter a little bit about who is Terry Bollea versus Hulk Hogan, and how all those scandals affected him. But back to Tito, in his autobiography, he had said like that he had never strayed, and that he even kind of chided other wrestlers for their indiscretions, and so my whole goal here was to tell the truth and to get at the truth. And so I felt like I'm going to present all the information I have here. And ultimately, I think that Tito comes across pretty well in the book and in the chapter. And so but yeah, to answer your question, I was very nervous going into his house, knowing that I'm going to ask about this very personal thing. And I've run into that several times with different people I'm writing about. And sometimes you have to just deal with that awkwardness or discomfort to push through to ask those questions.
now, the way I heard it, like I said, in part of my research, besides reading the book, I listened to a few other conversations and such. And I know you had said, at least with the Tito story, at least, you held that towards the end of your questioning, towards the end of
Right.
the interview.
Sure.
And I get that because of the potential uncomfortableness of something like that. But how do you think he handled it as far as talking to him? Were you talking straight? And could be another question in itself. Were you talking to Merced or were you talking to Tito?
Oh, I think I was definitely talking to Merced. No question. I mean, that whole interview, he was Merced. He wasn't in character. He was very honest. He was nervous about talking about that stuff. He was agitated at times because I think he was frustrated with himself, knowing what had happened. He never directed his anger at me, but I know he was very worried about how this would get portrayed.
Totally understand. And, I get it. Like I said, I deal with a lot of wrestling and wrestling stuff here on the, what I do. But in the words of Mark Henry there, as I just thought about that, it's what I do. No, but, it's interesting. I was thinking about it as you were saying it there. The business is very storytelling oriented, and
Right.
obviously, and like to think I have a couple working brain cells, and people like historians I deal with have a couple working brain cells, and I would include you in that bunch of as a historian trying to put a project like this together.
Mm-hmm.
That you have some working brain cells. But anyway, my point with that is it's a hard business to fact check because of a lot of the storytelling and things being passed down word of mouth. Because, for example, what you have the other project, of your other book, where when you look at baseball or other sports or athletic endeavors, when you're doing your research, you can look at statistics of things and like things that can be proven.
Right. You have
whether it's in the newspaper and stuff.
Right.
But wrestling, it's a lot of word of mouth. So how hard was it you to put things together?
Yeah, it's one giant oral history, right? Very hard because for all the reasons you're saying, in sports, you have multiple beat writers covering every team every season. And so you have a newspapers.com subscription and you have access to all the coverage in real time of those teams. And the same thing with the statistics. So yeah, wrestling is maybe the hardest thing to get at the truth about. And even the wrestlers themselves often don't remember correctly, or they don't remember years, dates, people. So I really relied heavily on talking to other people besides wrestlers, other people that knew them. I relied on other wrestling journalists. I relied on newsletters. I relied on, whatever primary source material I could get my hands on.
Word on. And and thank God I can finally say this publicly because you've talked about this as well. And I'm not knocking anybody who can do it or get it or whatnot. But I've noticed this in doing what I do. And I've been doing it just over 12 years now. So I've seen and dealt with all the nonsense and bullshit and stuff. But it seems like within wrestling, and I know you came across this, but there were folks would only talk to you because they could possibly get a payday out of you.
Right.
I won't say Tony Atlas. Okay, maybe Tony Atlas is one, but
and Tito.
Okay, there you go.
Which is another, to your another point about when Tito, he's like, oh, I'm going to charge you $750 to talk to you for 2 hours, which for me, I didn't want to pay anybody, but because in journalism, you really shouldn't. But I also understood, okay, well, they're not going to talk to me. So my compromise was that I would be very transparent about that with the reader and say, okay, I paid this person just so you know up front. And so, but that did impact when it came time to interviewing Tito and asking those hard questions about his daughter. In my mind, I'm like, well, I'm also paying you for your time here. So you should be prepared. This is on the record. You're being paid. I'm disclosing all of that. I didn't think it was unfair to, ask those things.
With that being said, and it's something like you said, there's a, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Journalistic integrity.
Sure.
And with doing something like that. And I never paid anybody or anything like that. But I do know of, like, especially wrestling related podcasts that will, in full disclosure. And hey, God bless you, all that stuff. If you do that, that's how you do your business, is how you do your business. It's not for me to judge. But something that always, and I had, my degree was within communications, journalism, and history.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously I know the ins and outs of all that stuff. And obviously you're a bright enough guy, you know all that stuff as well, even though that wasn't your majors with school. But the one thing I always thought about when it came to paying for interviews and such, and I'm sure that's probably crossed your mind, were you getting truthful answers for your questions, or was it, well, this guy's paying me, like you said, $750 in a Tito's case. Let me just tell him what he wants to hear, or what I think he wants to hear.
Yeah, that's the main reason why you don't pay your subjects, right? But I think in these cases, I think I was getting a very honest assessment and answers, because I don't think Tony Atlas or Tito Santana really give a shit about my feelings, to be honest. So I don't think that they really, they're in demand. They're used to fans wanting to talk to them. I don't see them, having this sort of premeditated effort to make me happy by telling me what I want to hear. Especially considering, I was thinking about that the whole time. So I crafted my questions in a way that would make it harder for them to do that.
Right on. And speaking of Tony, and that was some of the other stuff I had heard, and which is cool with this project too, and I'm doing it a little more and more, but you actually drove over 12,000 miles across the country, not only to talk to the talent themselves, but you talk to family members, friends, all these different other sources besides the talent themselves. But when it comes to Tony, at least, was it when you were talking, were you dealing with Tony Atlas or Anthony White? Because you mentioned and I'm going to mention this again, I heard it, I think it was the Cornette podcast, where you said, we ended up going and doing lunch during your time with him. You worked out with him the whole bit. But when you were out and about in public settings, people were looking at him as Tony Atlas and not Anthony White, the guy you were trying to talk to.
Sure. It's your question. Yeah. So I would say that I think that the person that I saw, I spent enough time with Tony Atlas to get, I think, a fair and honest view of what he's like. And I think to answer your question, the reality is that sometimes Anthony White doesn't know where Anthony White begins and Tony Atlas, or Anthony White ends and Tony Atlas begins, right? That's kind of the point of the book, is like, they don't even know when they're working, when they're shooting sometimes, because they've lived these characters for so long. So when I'm going around with Tony and he's seeing people, is he putting on the charm a little bit? Like, sure. I mean, no doubt, because he knows I'm a writer. But I would bet, knowing Tony Atlas, that he puts on that persona when he's out there, even if there isn't a writer with him. And, I think about documentarians, and it's like, whenever you see a documentary and people are talking, I mean, just think about, okay, maybe, we like to think we're getting the full truth, the authentic thing. But if there's a video camera on you and that, right? That's an even more, I mean, this is why I like print journalism, because I'm not putting a video camera in front of you. There are times when I may have a recorder out, but especially if we're out doing something, it's a lot harder to perform. I think you get closer to the truth when you don't have a camera like trained on you.
Oh, that makes total sense. And, it's another guy I got to know a little bit before his passing was Piper.
Mm-hmm.
But he also separated who is Roger Toombs and who is Roddy Piper,
Mm-hmm.
depending on where we're at. You know what I mean? He was able to, you got to see the real guy.
So you felt like you spent time when he was very much Roderick Toombs.
Yeah, that, what I mean? And I actually still talk to two of his kids often. And
But what was the main difference? What was the main difference in what he was like when he was Roderick Toombs?
And I think anybody and I'm not sitting here claiming to be best friends or anything like that. Yeah. So I had to say that because some people are like, whatever, go fly a kite. That's not what I meant. But I found him to be kind of quiet, shy person.
Mm-hmm.
Just he was a normal guy in a unique business where he made his fame and stuff, because at the end of the day I just want to make sure I take care of my kids and my wife, and I don't want the attention per se.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, some of the attention and everything else, the adulation later on when he become one of the most beloved heels, as WWE put it, he was very outgoing, very great with if people recognized him. He would snap of a finger. He was Roddy Piper.
Right.
But he was also gracious to everybody, whether he was going to a convention to sign autographs or somebody recognized him going to get something to eat or picking up a paper at the 7-Eleven, and in these different situations, because it was
right.
And I asked about it, and it wasn't for an interview or anything like that, because it never had him on this platform, but it was those people helped, generations of people helped paid my bills, made sure I put a roof and food for my family and my kids. So I'm going to be respectful if somebody approaches me, and gracious. And it made perfect sense because that's what paid my bills.
That's great. That's a great attitude. I always felt like Roddy Piper and Jesse Ventura were two guys that were independent thinkers and kind of really smart and protected themselves. And that's why they fought with Vince McMahon so much.
It's funny you just mentioned that. I just released an episode with Jesse last week.
I saw that. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, I'll tell you what, Jesse, you could have talked with him for hours.
I'm sure.
He because he's a very unique guy, whether it's the military background, the wrestling, he was a radio host for a while before he became mayor and governor and stuff like that. And it's like, Jesse's Jesse, you know what I mean? He's going to be, and I was actually a little nervous about talking with Jesse, because it was like, you hear different things, what Jesse you're going to get.
Yeah, he could be intimidating too.
Yeah, and especially someone who was a governor and all that, just everything he's done. It's like, what Jesse are we going to get? And the guy who co-hosted with me that day goes, let's play it by ear. You know better than us, right? You've been around long enough. Went well. It was awesome. But the thing that really was like, wow, and hit home for me was when it comes to Jesse, I got an email from his son afterwards. He goes, thanks so much. Jesse really appreciated it. But to get that response from Tyrell to say, hey, Jesse really appreciated the time and had fun with you guys, I'm like, wow, that's cool. You know what I mean? Just because he, again, going back to when we grew up watching Challenge and the pay-per-views and everything else in our younger days, it was I knew Jesse as the broadcaster. So the fanboy in me was like,
Of
that's
course,
cool
of course.
that the governor approved.
Absolutely.
So, ugh. Well, you know what? It's probably one of the most interesting topics in the book. And obviously, it's known, this thing, but being a cash business, let's just say. And obviously, you focus on some of the early days of the WWF, which will always be to me, damn it. But you talk about the or what do you call it? The producers, the agents, and stuff would carry cash with them, and there would be a lot of cash business, whether it to be paying off the talent or paying off the building, and just all the business transactions that you do in the wrestling business. But was that probably one of the most interesting topics you looked at? Because when you had how many people would think, especially in wrestling at that time period, would think of things like CFOs and all that stuff to set up, the accounts and everything for a company?
Yeah, I found that really interesting because when I spoke with the CFO, Bob McMullen, for example, he really shone some light on how, as he said, unsophisticated Vince McMahon's business was early on and how much cleanup he had to do. And I found that interesting because there's this narrative of Vince, being this supreme business genius, and he is to some extent. There's no doubt that he had the vision and the ambition, and he did it. But I think people like Linda are underappreciated because she really did a lot of the nuts and bolts work in those early years.
Bob did, you said, with the financial stuff.
Yeah,
You
I
said
think
Bob did.
Well, Vince was he I guess you could say this is a strength that he knew to bring people in to do things he wasn't good at or didn't know about. So he knew he brought in Nelson Sweglar to really clean up the TV, and he knew he needed someone like Bob McMullen, and he knew that he needed magazine people and so on. So he I think that was interesting to me was just to see how many things were kind of seat of their pants in those early years. And there was, could have also gone a whole nother way where the whole thing didn't work. I mean, I think without Hulk Hogan, I don't think it works, right? I think Vince and Hulk, they both needed each other. They both needed to be there.
Absolutely. And another name from the behind the scenes that you talk about is, excuse me, Jim Troy. So, what was Jim's role within the company, would you say, and what was his biggest strength that he brought to the company?
Well, I think Jim's main role was international touring and distribution and closed circuit getting into pay-per-view. So Vince really had him working on the whole TV closed circuit market. He was one of the guys going out there and meeting with station managers to air Vince's syndicated shows. And he developed an expertise in closed circuit and pay-per-view. And Vince was kind of at the forefront of how to use pay-per-view. And Jim Troy was a big part of making that happen. Also, he was kind of the lead agent or chaperone, if you will, on the international tours. And so I talk about some of those crazy stories in the book. And, to your point about wrestling, so much about wrestling media is about storytelling. I wanted to write a book that wasn't just me going around to former wrestlers and employees and saying, tell me good stories, because that's what so many people do, right? Is they just collect stories, and stories are fun, but to your point, stories can be inaccurate and exaggerated. And so I knew I wanted to have a little bit of that in there, which is why I shared some of those stories from the plane ride from the Middle East with Jimmy Snuka and all that. But I didn't want this to be a collection of stories either.
Who would you say, in all the folks you spoke with, was the most difficult to pin down to chat with, and why was it Sergeant Slaughter?
Well, yeah. So I didn't really get to talk to Bob Remus. I have my ideas about why he wouldn't talk to me, which is I think he knew that I would ask about his feigned military service, which is interesting because now he's come out publicly and finally said that, he did not serve. But at the time when I was doing my research, he had not done that. And so I think he wanted to also tell his own story. He probably knew that he was going to be featured in an A&E documentary, and he figured, well, if I'm going to have my story out there, I want to be the one in control of it. So I get that. But I was still able to tell his story again by going and talking to his high school football coach and talking to high school friends and that sort of thing.
So obviously, and I think it's a gem, and I don't know how much time you got to speak with him, but you got a chance to speak with the Hulkster a little bit down in Florida.
Well, no,
One
I
of
didn't.
his-
I didn't get to speak. I got to see him at his karaoke shop, and so I didn't really get to interview him. But I went down there and saw him in his element, and I did get to go and I did talk to people he was in a band with, the band Ruckus, and I talked to Jerry Briscoe, who helped get him in the business, and I knocked on the door of his childhood home and talked to the guy that lives there now. So I did a lot of reporting around Hulk's life.
So, book, I'm going to include links with all of Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all that
Great.
stuff. But I'm curious to know, because doing everything, I got to ask the Brat Pack. It's a modern day magazine, multimedia digital community for unsung heroes and untold stories of sports and entertainment. So I know that's a brief professional analysis of it, but how would you describe the Brat Pack?
Well, so the Brad Pack is my website and my focus right now, which is I realized after writing these two books that I have all this material that I collected that I didn't get to put in the book, right? So interviews, research, documents, and I always felt like kind of jealous of DVDs because they have all those special features, and I thought, well, why can't books have something like that? So I put a QR code in the back of the 6-pack, which goes to the website for the Brad Pack. And what I'm doing is I'm uploading the raw audio from my interviews. I'm uploading all these amazing internal WWF documents that I acquired that show, how much this guy got paid at this house show and how many buys this pay-per-view got. And I'm also doing new interviews with other wrestlers and athletes and baseball players that I can add on there in a video and audio format. So I hope people will check that out at thebradpack.com and see what we got going.
Well, you're the second person to have recently told me that about stuff that didn't make the book or books, that they are doing it through their website. And
Who was the first person?
I'll grab it right now for you because I was thinking about it. And because we were talking, you asked me about baseball and stuff. It's a gentleman. I don't know if you're a baseball fan, obviously. Rod Chandler.
Cool. So he's doing that too. That's awesome.
He does that. Has that same setup with the stuff that didn't make the cut because of words or whatever the thing is. I'll try to set you up with a copy of the book too. So, but it's about fantasy sports or fantasy baseball.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah. So I'll connect you with Rod or Ron. Excuse me. I'm sorry. But yeah, I think you'll appreciate that as a sports fan in general.
Definitely.
But obviously, we are in August of 2024. So my final two questions are, what do you have planned for the rest of 2024? And do you see yourself diving into more books? Because it's such a lengthy process to dive into doing books.
Yeah. So for the rest of the year, I'm focusing on the Brad Pack, doing more interviews, more content. I'm writing some shorter stuff because I also write about science and that whole part of my life. So I'm writing some, magazine length kind of articles, that kind of thing. And then I hope I can do another book. I mean, there's nothing lined up. As you said, there are enormous undertakings, and frankly, the economics of book publishing are almost prohibitive. For the amount of work that it takes, especially the kind of books that I write, where I'm driving tens of thousands of miles and going on the road and doing all the reporting. It's not easy, and I hope that the 6-pack sales pick up, but frankly, it hasn't sold as well as I'd like or as my publisher would like. Even though people that read it seem to love it, and I've gotten really positive reviews. In order for me to get another book deal, that this book has to sell better. So that's another factor.
And I'm not going to mention numbers or all that stuff, but you did an interesting post recently on this topic.
Yeah.
Of being able to, people don't think about the royalties and such of physical copies
right.
of books, but also on the other hand of that too, they don't also realize how important it is for physical copies to be purchased.
Mm-hmm.
Because as far as a financial gain of it, yeah, it's great. You buy Kindles and stuff. And as you can see over here, I need another one of these cases.
Yeah, that's great.
This is all physical books, but it's the physical copies when they sell is where royalties and stuff are made after the back end of whatever the deal is. You get X amount up front and to buy your book. So people don't realize all the nuances of that. So
yeah, no, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, that's true. That the old fashioned hardcover book still is the best financially for authors, more than the ebook or the audiobook.
So Brad, we're gonna send everybody to the links and stuff. But thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the thoughtful questions and the in-depth kind of analysis. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
Hey, this is April Hunter, and you are listening to Crazy Train Radio. Woo woo!